Welcome to The Nation. You're with me, ELANE NOOR Abdullah. Now joining me today to discuss Malaysia's economic performance in 2025 as we draw the curtain on the year and look ahead to 2026 is Dr. Tan Chee Meng, Assistant Professor in Business Economics at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia, here in the studio. And later, KISHAN JASANI, Chief Executive Officer of Grant Thornton, Malaysia, will be joining us virtually to weigh in on the discussion. Now, Doc, it's really good to have you back in the studio. Now let's talk about this performance that we've been seeing in Malaysia, and then there's a lot of talk about it, and we're closing 2025. The Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim highlighted that Malaysia is on track to achieve the higher end of its 2025 growth target, and Malaysia's economy recorded a 5.2% growth in the third quarter. And how would you characterize Malaysia's economic performance in 2025 under the Madani government, and was this a year of consolidation, recovery, or reform? Your thoughts?
Both consolidation and reform, definitely. I mean, we've consolidated the economy pretty well. We're looking at 5.2% GDP growth, as you said. Of course, the weakening of the US dollar because of the Fed interest rate cuts have actually played a role into that, so that made the currency stronger. But there's also a boost in FDI coming in. I think we have like almost $260 billion worth, or ringgit worth of billion dollars worth of FDI coming in from the outside, and that has actually been a fantastic performance for Malaysia so far. And so I think we have consolidated in that point. And then from the case of the subsidy rationalizations, we've also done fantastic as well as far as structural reforms are concerned.
Yeah, it's been a very exciting year. I think there's a lot of feel-good sentiment that's happening around. A lot of people may not understand why there's this rally, right? There's this like uptick in terms of the currency, and every day you keep seeing that, oh, we've gained and we've gained. So there's a lot of like sort of understanding in sort of the general population, like, is this going to hold? What's going to happen next year? Should we celebrate now?
Right.
Late 2025 is coming to an end, right? We feel like we're ending on a good note. But Malaysia recorded like you mentioned earlier, it's 285.2 billion in approved investment.
Right.
This was in 2025 in the period of about 9 months. So that's an amazing achievement. And despite global headwinds, because around the globe, you'll see there's a lot of challenges. But from an economist's perspective, if you're looking from your lens, how credible and significant is this performance?
I think there's, like what you said earlier, a lot of feel-good factors, so that's fantastic. But we have asked ourselves a question, how soon will these FDIs actually materialize? Typically, it takes at least 2 to 3 years. But from what I recall properly, the statistics is about 80% of them would actually become actual FDI. So I think that is optimistic, but the government can actually do more, obviously, in order to actually make sure that the red tape is actually synchronized and actually streamlined properly, so that we are actually not hindering businesses, and at the same time attracting more FDI coming in as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of optimism that we have with regards to what's coming and what's forecasted and what's projected. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of fruition of a lot of the plans and the policies that have happened in the past year that sort of created this confidence moving forward for us to be able to expect that maybe 2026 will also be a good year, despite maybe some rumors that, you know, we're heading into headwinds as well. Now, approved investments are up strongly, obviously, but economists often distinguish between headline numbers and the quality of that investment. How do you assess the quality of these investments Malaysia is attracting in the year 2025?
I think we have to distinguish between attracting investment from the manufacturing sector as well as the services. Malaysia has attracted a lot of services, and not all of them are necessarily very high in quality. So I would say high quality stuff like consulting, finance, things of this sort are actually maybe 40% right now of the service stuff. But we are looking at manufacturing, high quality manufacturing. That's where the gist is really. If we have more of that, and that is actually coming in as we actually speak, then we're actually doing very well. But in terms of what Malaysia can actually do, I would say we have to attract more FDI from the high quality manufacturing standpoint. And right now our emphasis is very much still on services.
Right. Now, foreign investment surged over 40% year on year. This was led by Singapore, China, and the US. What does this tell about Malaysia's positioning in a global regional supply chain, in your thoughts?
I mean, definitely we are a regional supply chain that is getting a lot of traction moving forward. But the question is, are we a secondary assembler? Are we just assembling stuff for people? Or are we actually innovators, creators that are actually creating stuff at the higher value chain? I think that is something that we have to ask ourselves. And of course, the issue here is if we become too beholden to certain powers going forward, would that actually play a detrimental force in Malaysia? I think that would be something we need to take a look at very closely.
Now, balancing that is no easy task,
No.
especially with all the geopolitics happening.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of sort of focus on diversification, obviously, and not just being, like you said, emboldened or helped to one particular party.
Right.
So I think but we've done pretty well in the past year, and Malaysia being the ASEAN chair has also helped guide the bloc in the right direction. I do believe so. Now, if global conditions worsen in the coming year in 2026, how resilient are we in Malaysia's current investment momentum, and what should policymakers prioritize to sustain this? Because that's what we're looking for, right?
Right.
Stability and obviously consistency and that growth.
I think we have to look a lot further than just what's happening in a year or two.
Yeah.
Because one of the questions is, you get a lot of investment, for instance, are these investment going to translate into some spillover effect into the local economy? Meaning, are we training people? Are we actually getting the supply chain for local businesses? Or are the FDIs or the companies bringing these FDIs actually doing their own thing without too much involvement from the Malaysian economy? So I think we need to look into things like research, for instance, getting people to come in and actually set up research centers so we can actually train people here to actually become a more resilient and sustainable economy. Otherwise, the problem would be people are just coming in and investing money, and then we're not actually benefiting from that.
Right.
So in that sense, we may not be as resilient, and we can actually be more so. But if you're looking at the reserves, for instance, the Malaysian reserve is about 500 billion, I think, US dollars. And so in that regard, we're actually okay. But we can actually do more in structural reforms and stuff like that in order to instill more confidence in FDIs and foreign investment.
I think that's our next step. But
Yeah.
we'll take a short breather right now, and later we'll have Kishan come in and weigh on some of this before we come back to you for the closing segment. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
Laut kita, khazanah yang tidak ternilai. Tapi ia sedang diancam. Aktiviti haram, pencemaran dan pencerobohan, semua ini menggugat sumber perikanan negara. Anda boleh menjadi ejen perubahan. Laporkan segera kepada Fishcom di talian yang tertera. Di Fishcom, setiap aduan anda direkod, disahkan dan dihantar terus kepada pasukan penguatkuasaan.
Fishcom terima satu kali aduan berkenaan vessel nelayan didapati memasang bubu naga.
Tindakan segera diambil demi melindungi laut dan memastikan keterjaminan makanan buat negara kita. Fishcom, salurkan aduan anda hari ini kerana sumber laut kita, tanggungjawab kita semua.
Hi, thanks for staying with me on The Nation. We're still discussing Malaysia's economic performance in 2025. And joining me online is KISHAN, Chief Executive Officer of Grant Thornton, Malaysia. Hi, Kishan. Welcome to the conversation. Kishan, thank you for joining us today. And Bloomberg Economics is forecasting that Malaysia's growth could slow to around 2.1% in 2026. This is partly due to the impact of US tariffs. In your opinion, does this mark the beginning of the end of Malaysia's growth story?
I think it has to be said in two ways. One is that if you look at the bad case scenario, it's a 2.1% growth. But at the end of the day, they're also looking at other providers, such as, say, S&P and RAM, that's talking about 4 to 5%. And it all hinges on three main things. The first thing here is that, one, are the investments going to be realized fast enough, as Professor just mentioned before? Number two, what is our impact based on the tariff? We have been basically benefiting a lot from the tariff wars between China and the US. Especially benefiting from being an alternative source of manufacturing for services. But number three also is that, are the cracks being seen in the US? I think the Madani government has done an excellent job trying to withstand and trying to navigate us through this entire, I would say, ecosystem. but there's more that can be done, and more should be done. You go to any mall now, you see spending is at an all-time high. You go to any restaurants, people are there, and tourist numbers are going up and up. So I mean, Bloomberg may be a bit pessimistic, but I'm looking actually more at a 4 to 5% growth. But I hope that the powers above us also sustain us through this period, especially when it comes to a period of uncertainty that we're facing in right now.
Now, we've heard a lot about strong investment approvals this year, but as we move into 2026, what does investment realization actually look like on the ground in terms of projects, jobs, and economic activity, Kishan?
And I think the proof is in the pudding, right? You see the amount of cranes that you're seeing around Malaysia. You see the infrastructure works that's been happening. So I'll give you three main examples. One is the Intel Pelican facility. That's going to be about 860 million ringgit investment by December to cement the starts on this operation. And it's 99% complete already. We've got Infineon's cooling phase 3 coming up. And even around Cyberjaya, I mean, the amount of data centers you see everywhere. I think the main prime example here is the YTL NVIDIA AI data center, and soon Ibrahim Technopolis. But here's the thing, right? So let's talk about data centers. So let's talk about the other aspect of it, which is services. Like it or not, we are sitting in the cusp of a very good confluence. We put the confluence of Kuala Lumpur together. First step, we speak 3 languages. Singapore is an expensive place to operate from, and more Singaporean businesses are placing themselves onshore in Malaysia to do business. We have also been, if you look at Ant Finance, opening up an office at TRX, you look at even the likes of, say, Huawei, and even the Indian companies coming in, and the US companies. You see more and more positive trajectory into the system itself. But again, it's about upskilling yourself. We are not here to be a bookkeeper. We are here to do and act on the operations itself.
Now, of course, you touched on data centers and digital infrastructure. They have emerged as major investment drivers. But let's talk about the ringgit. It has strengthened notably against the US dollar this year. Can that momentum be sustained if the US economy slows or if global financial conditions tighten?
Okay, so there are 2 parts to it. Number one, we know that the US dollar is depreciating faster than any other currency out there. It's now currently trading at 4.05 to 4.13. And we've seen 16.5 billion ringgit in foreign bond inflows year to date. But what we don't see is a translation of that into the capital markets. The capital markets are still fairly tepid compared to the rest of the peers, i.e. say Thailand or even Singapore or Indonesia. We need to translate what the money is coming in, and we need to translate the inflows into actual productive growth for the government and for the system in its own right. A cooling US economy is actually good news for the ringgit. I mean, the more we see rate cuts coming through the system, our interest rate gaps narrows. But here's the thing, right? We don't want it to be in a position where it is a full US crash. Because like it or not, if the US sneezes, we catch a cold.
Now, Kishan, there's always been talk about the rationalisation contributing to our momentum. Targeted RON 95 subsidies are a key reform under the Madani government. Will this rationalisation weigh on household spending, though?
I don't think so. Because if you see the way the government has spoken out, it said that it's only about 10 or 15% that has actually been using the full subsidy of the 200 litres. Even I myself also, I'm only using on average about 10 to 15% of that subsidy each month. So when you have that sort of savings and you're getting a 5 to 8 billion ringgit savings, that can go back to the SDR, the Sumbangan Tunai Rama, and that can also be used on to develop infrastructure and also develop more rail lines. But in development has to be beyond Kuala Lumpur. We see it's too focused in Kuala Lumpur, it's too focused on the Klang Valley. We've got to talk about beyond that. We've got to talk about the Penang. You've got Johor coming in with the rail, with the rail link. You've got Penang coming up with their Mutiara Line LRT. But more should be done in Kuantan, in the northeast of Malaysia, and even Sabah Sarawak. Development's been overly centric in KL. Hence, you see the jams. Even if you see Instagram videos, they say that KL is too car-centric. Let's spread the development. Let's spread the good news around.
Now, yes, you mentioned that the growth has been centered around Klang Valley. So what kind of economic growth are you looking at for the other states? How are they going to start benefiting more meaningfully?
Well, I mean, fortunately, it's all centered around the digital economy, right? You've got Johor, which has more data center power that has come online in the past 2 years and as Singapore has in the past 10 years. We've got a Johor Singapore economic zone with Sing dollars $5.5 billion already attracted to the system. That's coming more and more to see Johor as a epicenter of development down south, acting as a cohort to Singapore will really and greatly mobilize things over there. But let's talk about the other thing, right? And which is Penang. Penang has always been a very strong counterpart in the silicon system. It provides 12% of the world's silicon capacity. And we want to see more and more development of that. But again, it's not about the packaging. It's about going upstream. It's about bringing the likes of your ASMLs and your TSMCs into Malaysia so they'll be able to contribute back to the system.
Now, Kishan, let's talk about risks. If US tariffs turn out to be higher than expected, how exposed is Malaysia and how prepared is the economy to absorb that shock?
So I think that boils down to how good are we diplomatically. I think so far we've done a very good job. President Donald Trump is very happy with Malaysia. He's even put out a tweet about Perodua cars. So in that way, that is a good thing. At the same time, though, we have an issue here, which is the world is slowing down and the US is slowing down. We don't know what's going on because the US has been working on steroids for the past 3 to 5 years. We've been in an unprecedented bull run since 20 years ago. So the question now is, when does it stop? And if it stops, I think Malaysia is in a very safe place because we are well diversified. But if the other parties in the diversification also fall, we fall. So I think it's our role now to kind of onshore develop ourselves to ensure that our domestic economy is strong enough to sustain those shocks.
Thank you so much, Kishan. Do you have anything to add to that, Chee Meng, before?
I'm good.
Yeah? Okay. We'll take a short breather right now. When we come back, we'll speak more about what's next. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Tengok ni, aku dapat kasut baru. Nak tengok macam?
Thanks for staying with us. You're still watching The Nation. We're discussing Malaysia's economic performance in 2025. We're back with Dr. Tan Chee Meng, Assistant Professor in Business Economics at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. Chee Meng, we covered quite a lot in the first two segments, and let's discuss on what's next. Now, with less than a week left to 2025, the ringgit is trading around that 4.04 level to the US dollar, its strongest level in nearly 5 years. That's a huge milestone. Now, from an economist perspective, what fundamentally changed in 2025 to drive this turnaround? And to what extent can this be seen as a vote of confidence for that Madani government economic management policy?
I think there's definitely a certain percentage that is due to what the Madani government is doing, but we have to disentangle what is happening in the US and how that's affecting the exchange rate and what we're actually doing as a country.
Right.
So the US has cut the interest rates a couple of times. And so because of that, the currency is actually weaker. Because of that. I mean, that's a fundamental thing in economics. When you cut interest rates, typically your currency becomes weaker. And so this is what's happening. But we're also looking at the fact that the Madani government has done a pretty good job negotiating with Donald Trump. And we're actually positioning ourselves as a pretty good alternative when it comes to the supply chain across the globe. And so these things, along with the subsidy rationalization, has actually brought, I think, quite a bit of confidence in what the country is actually doing. And that has contributed substantially to the fact that to the strengthening of our currency.
Now, according to Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim recently, the government has saved 800 million ringgit through the implementation of the Budi Madani RON 95 program since September 30th. That's a very short amount of time, and that's a lot of savings. How significant is this achievement?
I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. It's a pretty small step, but definitely a small step in the right direction, as I said. 800 million is about 0.2, 0.3% of the entire GDP and maybe about 1% of all the subsidies that Malaysia actually implements. So we still have a long way to go, I think, but maybe in the future there would probably be more rational subsidy rationalizations in other things, for maybe for electricity, for healthcare, food, and things of this sort, and we'll have to see, but definitely the right step in the right direction.
That's at least, like you said, in the right direction that we're working towards. Now, has that Budi 95 program, though, helped shift market perceptions that Malaysia is serious about long-term fiscal discipline, though?
I think it has, because previous governments have not actually done things of the sort. So at the very least, the Madani government is doing something of the sort, and that's signaling to the market that, well, we are actually thinking about cutting subsidies. We're thinking about actually making things become more cost-effective going forward. And that would actually be very good, I think, as a signal that we're actually interested in fiscal reforms. And that would actually strengthen the government going forward.
And I think it's a great sort of a step, because with the current digital availability, it made it easier for us to be able to actually implement this. I think this was talked about for a long time, but that I think initially we talked about the realization of these policies, these talks, these actual action outcomes that we are seeing materializing. Now, one major outcome cited as sort of like our performance growth is the reduction of leakages, including subsidies previously enjoyed by millions, whether it's foreigners, whether it's through fuel smuggling. From a governance standpoint, how big of a breakthrough is this?
I think that's a major thing, because a lot of people were basically, like what we said earlier, what you said, smuggling fuel and then taking it across the border and stuff of the sort. Instead of having Malaysians or people living in Malaysia enjoy these sort of subsidies, we're actually inevitably selling cheap fuel to people outside the country. The fact that we're actually using a digital system to actually control this is actually a major step. And going forward, I think this will definitely bring a lot of confidence in what the Madani government is doing. I
think KISHAN mentioned earlier as well, you can see that there is substantial savings, because most people don't use that full allocation. Where it's like 200 liters, that's quite a lot, unless you're like literally traveling constantly. And if you're just circling around sort of like wherever that you live, you probably use half to 1/3 of whatever your allocation is. So there's beyond that sort of like allocation, there's further sort of like savings from there as well. Now, as we close out 2025, what is your overall outlook for Malaysia's economy in 2025? What do you hope to see? What are your projections? And maybe what are your concerns?
Well, we're looking at geopolitical headwinds. Of course, Malaysia being a very small country, and we're not the only country that's having this issue. All small countries have to sort of look towards China and America and see what they're doing in order to sort of hedge whatever problems they actually may have economically. Because like what KISHAN was saying, if America catches if it sneezes, we all catch a cold. Yes. And that's the inevitable truth, because all our economies in the world are tied in with whatever the Chinese or the Americans are doing. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we actually doing enough, maybe diplomatically, to not, to perhaps, how do you say, not anger, maybe, in some sense, these superpowers, but also making sure that our sovereignty and our economic interest is actually preserved at the same time. So I think we have these concerns, and Donald Trump being who he is somewhat unpredictable. So far, things are okay, but we don't know how things would actually be in the future. So we have to look out for that very, very carefully. Apart from the fact that the government also has to ask ourselves, if you're doing more subsidy rationalizations going forward, are we doing it too quickly, and how are we supposed to do this? So in economics, we have the saying, you learn by doing, and I suppose the government is actually going to be doing that pretty soon.
Thank you so much for that. And as you mentioned earlier, we are all interconnected. We have to find that balance. We have to find that push and pull, and find that place that we all can work together for continued growth, as well as the harmony that we're looking forward to in the future. Thank you so much.
Right, thank you very much.
CHEE Meng. Now that wraps up our look at Madani's economic achievements in 2025. This year, the government has strengthened Malaysia's economy through record investments, a firmer ringgit, and targeted subsidy reforms. So as we close 2025, the focus now is on sustaining this momentum, keeping the economy resilient, and ensuring these gains continue to benefit all Malaysians in the year ahead. I'm ELANE. Thanks for watching, and make sure to follow us for more in-depth conversations on issues that matter. Bye for now. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.